So I'll hand over to you, Colin. Good luck.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to my webinar. My name is Colin Grant. I'm the Director of Quality and Regulatory Affairs for Astrea Bioseparations. Today I'm going to talk about the challenges of implementing a GMP compliant quality management system for chromatography media. I'll go on to the next slide, hopefully. Oh, sorry. So very quickly, just to go through the overview of the presentation, really all we're looking for here is to kind of give you some timelines and identify what the key challenges that we came across, and to give you some previous experience from my side. I've previously set up 2 quality management systems from the beginning, up to and including GMP licensing. I've worked with advanced therapies, herbals, small molecules, and I've worked for both large and small pharmaceutical companies, from GSK, Thermo Fisher, and even one of the oldest pharmaceutical companies in the UK, a company called William Ransom. We do have some future webinars we hope to take forward, and feel free to add any comments and any requirements that you might so desire. So very quickly, I'll run through the agenda. So we've just gone through the overview. I'm going to look at the context of the organization and how we fit that in with GMP. I'm going to look at the timelines and developing a GMP approach. And then I'm going to break off and look at some of the more relevant points within that set of timelines, including change control, the technology transfer department and how we set that up, our quality manual approach, electronic quality management systems, the site master file and site validation master plan, and finally what we're going to look at for control strategies in 2021. So and how we actually bring this all together. So future webinars are including things such as risk assessments, right first time, and how we develop our training process as well, hopefully. But as I say, the more information we get, the more we can kind of design the programs moving forward. Context of the organization. So really what I wanted to do is give an insight to how we actually set up our quality management system and how we did it. So we've had ISO 9001 for about 18 years or so. And obviously there's been different versions of that ISO requirements throughout that time, the latest one being 2015. And I think what's really important is that we take a look at one particular section of that. It's the one in gold, where we're saying that the organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and its strategic direction, and that affects its ability to achieve intended results of its quality management system. So what we did is that we looked at what requirements we had from an external and internal approach, and what you'll see is what we've added to the diagram there on the right-hand side. But put simply, what we needed to look at is what our clients' expectations are and what external and internal issues we needed to resolve so we could achieve those expectations. Fundamentally, and for most companies, your strategy will change over 5 to 10 years. What has been fundamentally been the same within that is the quality management system. So what we've done is that we already had a quality management system in pre-2014, but what we've done is we've continuously improved, and I'm sure everybody in quality understands that statement of continuous improvement. Very quickly, one of the areas that we had to look at within the requirements for GMP and the ISO is to look at what our clients' expectations are and what the regulatory requirements are. So these are 2 of the external issues that I was talking about previously. So what are our clients' expectations? Well, they want a safe, non-toxic product. That's kind of first and foremost. But they also want, if possible, best in class. So we want it to be cost effective. We want it to be robust and stable. And obviously we want it to work well, which is the excellent flow and binding properties. On top of that, our clients also looked at, ensuring that we've got a product that's suitable for use, that's consistent, but also that it's there when they need it as well. So Additionally to the product itself, we're looking at the process. So control of processes and changes. We're also looking at raw material supplies, consumable supplies, basically a secure supply, both from a raw material front, but also the logistics of getting the product back to the client as well. One of the other requirements that they look at is the regulatory support. So a lot of our clients, and I believe there's 18 of our products are using 12 different pharmaceutical products. And to do that, they needed some regulatory support. So we provide what's called a regulatory support file. And that regulatory support file is there to help with their BLA filings or IMPD filings as and when they need it, or even their market authorizations. So one final part is of our clients' expectations is that our products are scalable from small R&D kind of chromatography right up to the large pharmaceutical chromatography systems that are currently in use. To jump onto the regulatory requirements, so last year bioseparations are currently not licensed by any regulatory authority, and to explain that is because we're not a final product and we're also not an active pharmaceutical ingredient. So in essence, our product is not used in the final pharmaceutical medicinal product. It's not involved within that, but it's used as part of the critical part of the manufacturing process. So when you look at, and the next slide will explain in a bit more detail, but when you actually look at it, there are no defined regulatory requirements for GMP for chromatography media as it stands. So how did we approach GMP? So we used what's called the Orange Guide, and that's the rules and guidance for pharmaceutical manufacturers. And it relates entirely to GMP. It's an MHRA document or book, and it's basically the quality Bible for the UK. It's run equivalent to Utralex Volume 4, which is the EU guidelines. And again, using what's called the International Council of Harmonization, the ICH guidelines, it also captures pretty much what is within 21 CFR Part 210 of the US regulations. So again, what we wanted to do is make sure that we were following as close as possible to these GMP guidelines. And although there's 3 distinct sections within the Orange Guide, the 2 that we were focusing on for this was to look at the medicinal products, part 1, and part 2, which is how to deal with active substances used as start materials, or in essence, the active pharmaceutical ingredients. So in both cases, we didn't achieve all the requirements. So for example, we've got no requirement to notify the MHRA if we have a recall of product, or we've got no marketing authorization requirements for a final medicinal product. If you're looking at part 2, again, there are certain areas where we had to take a common sense approach. So for example, there's no requirement for qualified person release, which is what is used for every active pharmaceutical ingredient within the EU. So again, the idea was look at a common sense approach, and I will explain more detail than that in the quality manual section of this webinar later on. One point that I wanted to kind of raise was the culture. Now, I've been working with a fantastic group of people. We never really had an issue with the implementation of GMP. In actual fact, the person that came in before me, who's my QA manager in the Isle of Man, Richard Hawkins, had already started to implement things such as change control and deviation when I came in. But what we needed to do is we needed to focus in on what was needed for GMP and how so we did an assessment, we looked at what our clients needed, and we went to the board with a presentation about why GMP was the best approach for us to take. And it was mainly in a lot of ways, A, because we understand how critical our product is, that we've got children and parents and family members that may be using final products that our materials have been used in. So we understood the need really for GMP from a basic approach, and really we got that buy-in from the board as well whenever we approached them. Other areas that we needed to look at is to see if we could get buy-in from the department managers, because there's a lot of work involved in the implementation of GMP, but fundamentally we approached it from the fact that quality can save time and cost. As it says in the tin, GMP is good manufacturing process. And what was really wonderful is that the buy-in was consistent throughout the departments. Moving on from there, we developed a quality policy. We already had one based on ISO requirements, but we reviewed that and we implemented it according to GMP. So we had a GMP approach for a few years while we worked our way through the GMP requirements as defined within Part 2 of the Orange Guide. We had a lot of the work involved training, GMP training, and again, things like risk assessments, root cause analysis. All these things needed to be trained out and to start to give the tools to the people that are needed. We also implemented lean processes, and again, the lean process is very, very handy for defining those tools that we use, be it the 5 whys and root cause analysis or whatever else. So we implemented both to save wastage on processes, because if you can reduce waste on a process, you improve the quality naturally behind that as well. So lean and quality does have a certain parallel requirements between the two of them, and so that's what we decided to do. We implemented it both around the same time. We had to develop a phased approach to implementation, mainly because we all had our day jobs as well, but we also wanted to take time and get the buy-in as we introduced different systems along the way. So it was very, very important to get everybody involved, including R&D, who hopefully I'll later explain when I look at the control strategy about what they've been doing behind the scenes in terms of quality by design and stuff like that, so we get a better understanding of our products as we move forward. So I'm going to very quickly go through the timelines on this. In essence, what I wanted to do really is kind of point out the areas that I'm going to talk about today. These are the gold areas that I've highlighted. There's some kind of deeper purple ones, which I think we could take offline, because they're a webinar in themselves, basically a training program in themselves. And we hopefully, as I say, we'll take them offline, develop the processes, and we'll have additional webinars as the year goes on. But really what I wanted to say is I wanted to focus on things that I thought in a webinar might be most relevant to people starting up or working on a new quality management system, or who basically want to audit us at some point. So again, I'm looking at the change control and deviation. I'm looking at how tech transfer team was set up. I'm also looking at issue 7 of the quality manual. That's when we move from a non-GMP approach to a GMP approach, and what we use is the active pharmaceutical ingredient Part 2, as mentioned previously. Additionally, as 2017 went on, we started to develop additional systems. One of those areas was the electronic quality management system. Although hard copy documentation works, and indeed at this point in time we're temporarily running it while we get a new quality system, electronic one. There are issues with control around hard copy documentation, so an EQMS is quite critical moving forwards, to ensure that we've got as much control as we possibly can around the documentation and around how we feed back deviations, change controls, and how we get a consistent approach to these areas. Other areas I'm going to look at are the site master file and the site validation master plan. And if I have time as well, I'm going to look at the 2021 development of the control strategy to ensure that that we're developing according to the MHRA guidelines and the latest requirements from the MHRA. So to start, the change control and the deviations. So in 2014, as mentioned, Richard Hawkins, who's my QA manager in the Isle of Man, came over and he started his first role. And then one of the first things he did was to introduce the change control and deviation process. I have to hasten to add that there were already systems in place, including validation and stuff within our quality management system pre-2014. We had ISO clean rooms for manufacturing. We had taken a lead in those areas as well. So there was a lot already done within that process. But Richard introduced the first change controls and deviations. And really, he spent the year kind of bringing people up to those standards and getting them to understand the needs and the requirements. I won't go through of what, but some of those areas are changes to the manufacturing process, changes to analytical methods. All these things are relevant to the client, and the client actually wants to know if we are going to start modifying our manufacturing process or our analytical methods. So they were very, very relevant at the time, and I believe that Richard kind of took the need from that from previous audits from our clients. So one point I wanted to kind of aim at is the tips. So first of all, when you're talking about change control and deviation, it's very important to have minor, major, and critical levels, each with a different approach, a different response as well. So for example, for minor information, you don't want to be telling the CEO that somebody forgot to close the door, but you do need to tell department heads, people like that, and you need to put those CAPA actions into place. Whereas for major and critical levels of change or deviation, we may need to inform our client, we need to inform other areas. So again, what you don't want to do is be focusing all the time on the minors. What we need to do is make sure that you're prioritizing the majors and the criticals. And then what free time you have, you focus on the minors at that point in time. We developed a corrective action and preventive action, or CAPA process, to deal with actions as per MHRA guidance. But we added an additional point within there, which is the correction. So if you've left the door open in the fridge, obviously the first thing you do is you put the correction in there, you close the door before you come and start talking about corrective actions. Try and solve the correction as safe as you possibly can. If you have problems, contact your nearest line manager, obviously, and then work through that about what needs to be done. But eventually, we should be getting some document information about how we do the investigation, how we do a deviation, and what CAPAs and preventive actions that we look at. So the way I look at it is corrective is dealing with the problem. Preventative is looking around you and seeing if there are other risks that we haven't captured, and to implement systems and actions to deal with those preventative areas. Finally, one tip I would also add is look at your general quality attributes. A lot more important for major and critical, but we're looking as well that if you're doing a change, make sure that you involve your HSE representatives. Make sure that you're dealing with a public perception side of it. So you don't want to basically build a large tank and stick it next door to of effluent and stick it next door to an estate, housing estate or something like that. They may have concerns. Look at what's around you. Look at your external influences is what I'm trying to say. And also look at the financial impact. Is it worthwhile to change, or is there a cost benefit of making those changes? And if there isn't, is there a quality benefit of doing that? Because quality and finance work side by side in a lot of cases. Now, Richard introduced the initial change control and deviation, and it was a very much basic systems at the time, very similar to what you'd have been doing in 2014, 2015. Since that time, and the ICH, or International Council of Harmonization, they've introduced what's called Q9, which is risk assessments. Very useful if you ever get a chance to read the ICH guidelines. They do provide a lot of information from design of experiments right the way through to dealing with a full quality management system. That's Q10 of the ICH guidelines. So some of the biggest changes to our deviation and process were to develop these risk assessments, and also to develop the root cause analysis process as well. Again, as mentioned, we train people in the lean green belt approach, and that also helped provide tools to support these things. So some of the tips, one of the big things that we did, and I think that provided a massive benefit to ourselves as we developed GMP, was we restructured the QA team. The QA team at the time was seen as kind of the police of the department. They checked BMRs, they checked deviations, change controls. But what we needed to do is kind of bring our production teams, our engineering teams, and we needed to give them support to develop those risk assessments and root cause analysis. You can be involved in training with these things. You can go away and a week later you'll have to come back and the process is difficult. Whereas what we did was that we put a member of our QA team as a support person, and they facilitated the risk assessments and root cause analysis, at least up until a point where people started to get the hang of it and started to use it. So very much, we think that is a kind of one of our big benefits of changing that quality. Our quality structure was to kind of focus in on that. And we've seen the responsibility now being taken on from all the departments. And it's been great to actually see how they're taking a lead now in a lot of these areas. So one other things, tips that came through is the RCA. And what I notice is that the more senior you are, the more likely you have a predetermined root cause. I'm the worst at that. But really what you want to do is you want to follow the process. Try not to come in with a predetermined root cause. Follow the process and you'll be surprised where it leads you. One other thing, and one of the main tools that we've used is the 5 whys. Feel free to have that looked up. And again, we'll hopefully have a webinar around root cause analysis and right first time at some point. And again, the 5 whys is a very simple tool. It's like a FMEA tools as well that are useful. But again, use what you feel is comfortable to your teams and to the company that you're working with. One more thing is when you're looking at root cause analysis and you're looking at risk assessments, try not to do it on your own. And if you do have to do it on your own, then get review. It has to be by a team, but the more people that see the process, the more people see the risks or the root cause, the more issues are identified and the more the solutions are put into place to prevent that happening again. You'll always have mistakes within pharmaceutical. Everybody within quality understands that, but you shouldn't have the same mistake happening more than once. So, and that's kind of how our KPIs work. We want to make sure that people are not worried about reporting issues or deviations, but what we want to do is make sure that the process itself covers and make sure that that issue does not happen again and again and again. So it's very important to get the right definition and the right root cause, and to do that, use the tools that are out there. So set up the tech transfer. One of the first things I noticed when we came in was that R&D were passing the new product directly into production at the Isle of Man. I'm not going to break down everything here. I just wanted to say that by R&D going straight to production, production's main focus is getting batches out the door. QC's main focus is to get the testing completed and the batches out the door. R&D, basically the communication behind that and the time to kind of optimize processes and that were really pushed by the manufacturing schedule. So what we needed to do is that we needed to separate that out slightly. We also wanted to have people that could actually work on root cause, that can work with the teams, both production, engineering, and see if they can get a group together and actually try and sit down and focus in on those root causes and see what we could do to improve the areas. Other areas that we looked at were things like validation. We had a very standard process. So it's a very, I've seen it around for the last 20 to 30 years, and that's the 10 times scale. So if you manufacture a 10-liter validation batch, you can, as long as you made 3 of those batches, you could do anything up to 100. The tech transfer group was to kind of add in and look at a risk assessed approach to that. So what did we do? We defined out a set of responsibilities for TT. We hired the relevant people to do that. And some came from R&D, some came from production, and some we hired separately. And basically what we did is we hired a manager, a TT manager, Phil. And from there, Phil worked on his department and has put more and more requirements in. And as you can see, I had a list of things that I wanted them to do, but I'm fairly sure TT will come back and say we've done a few more since then as well. So, so I put a slide to the side there to kind of give you a general understanding of how our approach was at the time. That was to look at market and design, discovery. You had 3 different departments within the R&D development section, which was chemistry, DSP, and assay. And then the tech transfer group, that they were all basically situated in Cambridge. What we needed was a cross-link over to the Isle of Man. So that tech transfer group was that kind of cross-link between R&D and the production. And it's at that stage that we've decided that GMP would start to be implemented at the tech transfer stage. So it's very, very relevant to get this group in and get them up and working as fast as possible. And indeed, they jumped at the chance, and it's been improvements since then, day in, day out, basically. So very happy of how that's worked, and it's also, as we can see, the benefits from a TT approach. We've standardized a lot of our validation. We've got now a consistent approach. We've also got a requirement from certain clients. Some clients want the full QBD levels of validation, and some clients just want 1 or 2 batches done and sent over to them. Our clients have different requirements. What we have now is a chance that we can support those client requirements based on our standard approach. So again, it's one of those whereby we looked at things like analytical and process transfer teams. We have now a new troubleshooting area and optimization. So, but more importantly, we're understanding our products better and better every day. Both the new ones that, again, R&D and T&T are working together with, but also our older products we're learning and we're feeding back, using the control strategy to feed back into R&D and TT any issues or problems that we have in manufacture, so that we can continuously improve all the manufacturing and get a better understanding of how our manufacturing processes work and what's identified as the critical parameters of our manufacturing process and the critical quality attributes of our products as well. The main point of TT was to support the GMP aspects of validation, but they've also taken on support of qualification as well of equipment, and they've been involved throughout, working with all the different departments to make sure that we're up to kind of a GMP standard as far as we possibly can be in terms of validation. Quality manual. So version 7, so previously we had over 6 versions. Really, those versions kind of captured the requirements of ISO alongside some points around change controls, documentation like that. And this is where we made some changes. So it's not typically the way I would run a quality manual, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to show any auditors that came on site that we were working against a known GMP standard. We also, Richard and I, wanted to have a look at what requirements we might be missing within the GMP requirements. So we did something that I think we regretted at the time, but it was beneficial at the end, is that we went through every section within the Orange Guide, every subsection, and we even assigned the different points within the Orange Guide against our quality manual. And the idea being is that, say, for example, QP release, we may have a statement within our quality manual that actually says that we don't do QP release, and we explain the reasoning behind it. We've had a number of large pharmaceutical auditors come and visit us since then, and that seems to be a useful process that we've done for them. They seem to appreciate that whenever we're showing it to them. It just allows them to kind of define out where we are and what we are good at, what we're improving on, and again, what things are not relevant within part 2 of the Orange Guide. It did take a lot of time to do that, and it's recommended that if you already have a quality management system in there, that you may want to look at how other people do quality manuals, but that was our approach and we found it beneficial since then. 21 CFR, GAMP5, and the electronic quality management system. I'm sure everybody is going to enjoy this one, but the essence being is that it's a very, very important factor behind this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on a couple of the highlights around that, like what is GAMP5 and what is 21 CFR. But I also want to kind of highlight the tips because they're very important. And I'm sure anybody working on a new EQMS system will appreciate the need for this. So and so will their suppliers. So the essence being is GAMP, and especially GAMP 5. And GAMP stands for Good Automotive Manufacturing Practice. It's not a surprise. But basically, GAMP 5 is the methodology. And in the US, they've got what's called 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. And that's about electronic signatures, stuff like that. And really, GAMP talks about the how, 21 CFR talks about the what, in terms of, you know, what are requirements. So what security do you need, data integrity of different systems. All these things are captured within 21 CFR. So in essence, when we first started, which was about 2 to 3 years ago, we were working with a group called Liminal, or Chromatic. It used to be our sister company. And they introduced a system called Master Control. Master Control is a very, very good system, and at the time it was relevant to us because quite frankly it was an FDA requirement for our sister sites, and they had control over what systems that they put in. So we kind of hanged on to their tailcoats when we did this. But there was a number of problems that came out of that. So for example, we had plasma collection facilities, we had final product facilities, and whenever we wanted to raise a deviation, we would have all these drop-down boxes that were pretty much irrelevant to ourselves. So it caused a little bit of confusion around that, and it's where I come back to my tips. Very, very important to keep the changes to the minimum, and I'll explain that in greater detail in the next slide. But if you have multiple sites, then try to keep a parent-child approach to data storage and to the use of the actual system, because obviously you want to keep your deviation process as close to possible as the issues that you will find within your site. You don't want to have to deal with other areas that might cause interpretation issues or anything like that. What's very important within this, and especially when you're putting in any kind of electronic system, is to get the buy-in from the departments. These are the people that actually have to use it. They have to fill it in, and you have to bring them along. Otherwise, the problems will originate near the end of the process, where they're saying, well, why did we not phrase it like this? Why did we not do it like this? It's very, very good just to bring them along with us at that time and frame, and then you get the buy-in that you need for this stuff. And talking about taking changes to the minimum, it's very important from a GAMP 5 perspective that you keep the changes when you're doing a new electronic quality management system to minimum. The reason behind that is that, in essence, you've got a number of different categories within GAMP. GAMP category 4 is to look at an off-the-shelf EQMS system, or actually category 3 is off-the-shelf. Category 4 is an EQMS system, and category 5 is where you're designing a system itself. You don't want to really, the amount of work and the amount of effort required once you start to move in and into designing a system, it actually adds on a large amount of work and can cause more and more confusion, especially when you're starting to validate the process. My biggest recommendation I can do is say, talk to your electronic management system group, your supplier, and I'm sure every single last one of them will say, keep it off the shelf as much as possible. So, and it just makes your lives a lot easier. It's easier to change your process. And in actual fact, just to read on to the slide I've got here. So once Gamma bought us, we had a moment whereby we could actually review our EQMS system. So we did a comparative study of a number of EQMS systems, and we identified a company called Qualsys, who, as we speak, we're working on their scope and requirements today. But one of the big things that really kind of made me a very happy person recently was I was on a meeting with Qualsys in the last couple of days. They were showing us the deviation process, and one of the big templates was the correction. They have at the very beginning, what did you do to correct the problem? And again, it goes back to my Kappa It should be really called C-Kappa, which is correction, corrective action, preventative action. And what I liked about Qualsys is that they had already thought that through. And that's the type of thing that you're looking for whenever you're looking at demo runs for different people. Does the system work with your quality system as it works? What we found was that Qualsys had already thought through some of the problems we were experiencing. So also the fact that they also helped with the implementation made it the obvious one for us. But I'll leave it to other people to make their own decisions on that. In terms of site master file and site validation master plan, and every other quality system that I've set up, they were set up with start-off companies. In essence, there would be 5 to 10 people within the new system. And at that point in time, the best thing to do is to develop your site master file and your site validation master plan as you bring in new systems and new developments. Within Astria, we've been running for 30 years. We'd already put in systems like above and beyond that what most companies already had. For example, clean rooms for our manufacturing processes. So we had other areas with validation, documentation. They may not have been the way I would have looked at it at the time, but they were there, they were feasible, and they were within the last 5 to 10 years, they were the standard systems that were there. It was just around the time I was joining, there was a big drive from MHRA as well over the last few years to kind of go through a risk assessment approach. So a lot of our changes were based on risk assessment. The site master file itself is important for GMP and non-GMP audits as it provides useful information. It's a requirement for both UDRLEX Volume 4, the WHO guidelines, and particularly the Orange Guides. And the site master file itself should be a fairly small 25 to 30 page document explaining, the critical people like the Director of Operations, people like that, the production manager, what their CVs are like, obviously mindful of GDPR and stuff like that. But again, it's very important to kind of put these in. We didn't do it to start with, but that was because we already had systems in place that kind of did the same job for us, just not in the way it was described within the Orange Guide and stuff like that. So again, site validation master plan, it takes the concepts inherent in ICH Q4, Q9, Q10, and Q11. I should highlight that the Q10 approach, which is quality management systems, and that's worldwide ICH standards, International Council of Harmonization, so standard worldwide, involves both ISO 9001, but also the GMP guidelines. So if you can achieve both, you should be fulfilling the Q10 requirements within the ICH guidelines. And I believe every auditor, be it a large or small pharmaceutical company, understand and appreciate the ICH guidelines for what they are. The site validation master plan covers the qualification, validation. We're also introducing, and again, part of the control strategy that we're going to talk about is the life cycle of the product. So recently, in the last year or so, we've started to do periodic product reviews. And the MHRA guidance, again, this is something very typical to what we had within GMP. Within the MHRA guidance, it says annual product review. But because we've got 56 products that we run the campaign, we might only make 1 or 2 batches a year or something like that, which is very difficult to review. So we changed our terminology to periodic product review, and we base it on the number of batches rather than an annual process. So again, slight changes, but we try to do the best that we could come up with at the time. And it was discussed amongst the TT departments, the quality department, and even all the different departments that were involved within this to see how we move forward with that. And we got the buy-in that we needed within that. Some of the tips behind that includes data support and qualification from external sources. So for example, if you've been running the same base matrix for 30 years, we've got a lot of data behind that. So why validate the base matrix? Let's focus on the ligands, let's focus on the new areas. We looked at different areas. You can get documentation, and as long as you can prove and you can see and understand the adequate controls that were involved in identifying those external sources, the data that came from it, then use them. Feel free to use it. The other area that we looked at is QBD, quality by design. It's been run for a lot of our new projects since 2018, 2017 within R&D, and it provides better understanding of our acceptance criteria and our specifications. It also identifies the critical parameters and ensures that the manufacturing process is better understood. It's fundamental within the control strategies as we move forward, to make sure that we can look at things like continuous verification as we move forward, instead of just standards validation requirements as is. So concurrent validation, or whatever, which way you want to look at it. So finally, the control strategy. So the control strategy is based on ICH guidelines. You can see I'm saying the same thing repeatedly. Again, there's only a certain number of documents that you really need to focus on GMP. Some are ICH, some are the EU UDRELEX Volume 4, and some are 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. So if you manage to read through all those, you've got a very good understanding of GMP requirements. But one of the big pushes from the MHRA last year when we attended their conference was to look at control strategies. Control strategy, and I'll read it out directly from the ICH requirements, is a planned set of controls derived from current product and process understanding that ensures performance and product quality. The controls can include parameters and attributes related to the drug substance and the drug product materials and components, facility and equipment operating conditions, in-process controls, finished product specifications, and associated methods and frequency of monitoring control. So in essence, it's looking at ensuring that you understand your process. Understand that if the temperature goes up 10 degrees, what impact does that have? And it requires a lot more upfront kind of R&D activity and TT activity, but it provides a better, more consistent approach to the manufacturing. And hopefully, and as we've seen within our KPIs, we're seeing the associated decrease in deviations behind that. So again, we've got the KPIs to prove that the process of understanding your, getting your critical parameters, getting your quality attributes for your products provides massive benefits in terms of deviations and stuff like that. Sorry, hopefully it's not COVID-19. But anyway, so different types of control strategy. So what we're currently working with, in essence, is a traditional approach. So we look at things like release testing, we look at in-process controls, we look at change control and process validation, using the basic standards of 3 batches at a distinct scale. We'll validate those 3 batches, and we'll make sure that we run all products against those validated standards. We've also got the input testing materials. So we've got a project ongoing now to increase the testing. I do apologize. Increase the testing within raw materials that we're getting to ensure that we don't have any kind of impact or issues as part of the manufacturing process. Excuse me. An enhanced development approach, or the QBD is side of it, is that we start to look at the product characterization. We still got in-process controls, but we're starting to now to look at continuous process verification. Over the next year or two, we'll be looking at that. We'll still do the standard validation approach, but we also want to kind of combine the continuous process verification, which is, again, kind of captured within the periodic product review, whereby we sit down and we assess our different products and how the manufacturing works. We look at the deviations, we look at the KPIs, we look at the trending data that we're getting from QC on the testing, and we look generally to make sure that the process is under control still. Again, that ties in with your process characterization, sorry. And that includes the quality risk management, justifications. You're looking at your critical quality attributes, and you're also looking at your quality risk control as well. And again, we've also got our input testing materials, but again, we're reaching out more as well to different suppliers. We're looking at business continuity behind that. And we're really kind of focusing on passing back some of our older products currently to R&D. And they're doing an assessment on the raw materials, identifying which ones are critical and what critical areas of testing we need to do. And then we're now going back to our suppliers at this point in time. We're asking them if they can help with the C of A's around that. And if not, we're taking those tests internally. So in essence, an enhanced approach, although it kind of covers more upfront requirements and provides a far more consistent approach to the manufacturing process, and it allows us to trend and understand data as it comes in, rather than taking snapshots, which is what the traditional approach would do. So at that, I'm pretty much finished with my webinar. Thank you for listening, and I'm very happy to take any further questions.
That's great, Colin. Thanks very much for that presentation. We have got a few questions, obviously conscious of time. Perhaps we can start with the first question, which relates to how we approach approving other suppliers.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting topic. We've had a lot of work into this area. I could probably hold a whole webinar just on that one topic, to be perfectly honest. One of the first approaches we did is that we trained people. We trained them up to, we've got 2 people now fully trained, apart from myself, excuse me, as lead auditors. And we did that again through the kind of ISO requirements approach to make sure that we've got a standard kind of approach to approving our auditors moving forward. So it's a lead auditor training that we send people out for. I think what we did then is that we risk assessed our critical suppliers. So, you know, basically who were the most at risk, and that kind of, we had about 5 or 6 different factors within that. And one of the lead auditors, she ran that, Tracy, she ran that basically to make sure that we understood where our risks are within the audits. And then we sent out to start with questionnaires. And then using the questionnaires, we did a risk-based approach to that. And then we identified who was critical in terms of, you know, quantities that supply it, critical materials, you know, materials that are more critical to the manufacturing process and have a higher impact. So we assessed all these kinds of things, and then we focused in on the audits. Now, interestingly enough, with COVID-19, we've had a number of problems because obviously we can't go and visit our suppliers. So we're now looking at things like virtual audits, stuff like that, to see if we can support that if it continues on into 2021. So again, just to say that one of the biggest problems you have as a small, medium enterprise, or if they're perceived as a small company, is the responses from the large suppliers. So it's always useful, especially if you've got sister sites and a larger corporation behind you. So for example, in my previous role, I used to ask auditors about Fisher Bioservices, and you wouldn't get much of a response. But when you mentioned Thermo Fisher, they responded within 24 hours. So again, use what you can to kind of push those supplier requirements and to get them to respond as soon as you can.
Okay, that's great, Colin. I think we're just about out of time. So thanks very much once again. And just to let everyone know that this webinar will be posted on YouTube in the next few days. Okay, thanks very much, Colin.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye, everyone.